The Genesis creation story is one of the most well-known creation stories in the world. It was for a long time thought to be the oldest creation story in the world until 1849. What happened in 1849 was that we discovered in Iraq an older creation story from the Mesopotamian civilization or the Babylonian Empire, whatever you want to call it. But it was discovered there in 1849 in a series of tablets, 7 tablets. It records an older creation story than that recorded in the book of Genesis. Now, what's interesting about this, if you're like me, and you think that the Genesis creation story holds the key to understanding the nature of God, the nature of human life, the meaning of human life, then what I'm going to try to show here is why you need to go read the Enuma Elish. So if you want to understand Genesis, I think you've got to read the Enuma Elish, and I'll explain why in just a second. So let me tell you a little bit about the Enuma Elish, just the history of it. I'll talk about Genesis. I'll talk about what happened in Jewish civilization that makes the Enuma Elish relevant to the book of Genesis. And then kind of the exciting part is to talk about why the themes of Enuma Elish are important for understanding the book of Genesis, or the creation story in the book of Genesis. So the Enuma Elish, why is it called that? Well, for a silly reason or an uninteresting reason, we don't know the name of it. We call it the Enuma Elish because those are the first words in the story. We found it, like I said, in 1849 in what is now Iraq on a series of tablets. It is remarkably intact. We don't have all of the text. So if you go read it online, and you can and you should, you'll find parts of the text there. You know, the editor will just tell you, like, hey, we don't have it. We can't read this part, or it was not there, or it was on a damaged part of the tablet, or whatever. But we have most of it, enough that you can kind of get the story and a lot of the details, most of the details. The story, or the story itself, is over 3,000 years old. It was written towards the end of the second millennium BC. So a little over 3,000 years old. It's written in Akkadian. That's the language it's written in. Okay, so that's the history of the Enuma Elish. Why is it relevant to our understanding of the Genesis creation story? Well, the answer to that falls to one key event in Jewish history, and that is what is called the Babylonian captivity. In short, what happened was the Babylonian Empire came in at the beginning of the 6th century BC, so the upper 590s, and conquered Israel, or at least the kingdom of Judah in Israel. And the king, Nebuchadnezzar, took captives back to Babylon. He took another set of captives back 15 or 20 years later. Equally important, though, to him taking those captives, didn't kill them, he kept them in his empire. And you can read about this, for example, in various biblical books like the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel is about a group of guys who were taken to the Babylonian Empire, including Daniel. But equally important, those exiles, or at least some of them or their descendants, came back to Israel. Now, the importance of that is this. They would have been interacting for, in some cases, up to 60 years with Babylonian culture. And so the theory goes that the Babylonian creation myth, which was this defining myth of this culture, would have been something that they very clearly would have interacted with, would have come to know. Not that they would have accepted it per se, but it would have been something that they imbibed. They were there for not 60 minutes, they were there for 60 years in some cases. So the theory is pretty clear here that, I guess once you enter in this extra piece of evidence, which is that, here's where one of my assumptions comes in. If you read Genesis, and if you read the first 2 to 3 chapters, some people have concluded that there are 2 separate creation stories there. That is, there is the creation story that takes up the entire first chapter of Genesis and runs a few verses into chapter 2. And then some people read it as then starting another creation narrative. And there's some overlap, but there are some really key let's say, tensions, especially about, say, the order of creation. So in one of them, plants come before people. In another one, it seems like they're talking about people before they talk about God creating plants. And that's one piece of evidence, or at least the flavor of the evidence, flavor for one kind of evidence that these are two separate stories. And the theory goes written at two separate times. And they're backwards chronologically. So the idea is that the second story, the one that starts in chapter 2, is actually the older story, would have been 9th to 10th century BC, but that the chapter 1 story would have been 6th century BC. Guess what else happened a little bit earlier in the 6th century BC? The Babylonian captivity, the return of the exiles. And so the theory goes, again, there's some scholarly disagreement about this, but the theory goes that the story you read in chapter 1 of Genesis was written after and maybe because of interaction with the Babylonian creation myth. Now, this is not like some sophomoric accusation of plagiarism. Far from it, and I hope you'll stick around so that I can prove that. What I think, to kind of give you a teaser or a spoiler, what's actually happening here is that the Jewish writers are critiquing the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian narrative. And actually they're critiquing, because the Enuma Elish was representative of lots of the trends or beliefs about creation and the nature of the gods and the nature of humanity in that area at the time. Indirectly, the Jewish writers are critiquing ancient Near Eastern creation myths and again, also ancient Near Eastern views of gods, views of humans, human natures, humans' place in the world, the purpose of humanity, etc. Okay, so let me tell you the Enuma Elish story real quick. Again, eliminating lots of details, but hitting the highlights. Creation starts in undifferentiated chaos, that is swirling waters, undifferentiated waters. They haven't been divided yet. It's just swirling water. It's divided into bitter water and sweet water, so probably fresh water, salt water. And that division also creates the god. One of those bodies of water is Apsu, the male god. One of those bodies of water is Tiamat, the female god. They come together. They create the younger gods, a group of younger gods. And there is immediate conflict because Apsu is annoyed by the noise that the younger gods make. So he hatches this plan to kill him. I mean, of course, that's your next move, right? So they find out that he's going to try to kill him. And one of the younger gods, Enki, kills Apsu before he can kill them. Okay, so interestingly, Enki then uses the body of Apsu to create his home. Tiamat, her husband, just got killed. She's going to go out. She's advised by a god named Kingu to go out and kill the younger gods. So she starts waging this war against the younger gods. Eventually, amongst the younger gods, this champion Marduk emerges. And he ends up killing Tiamat. And then a couple of really interesting things happen. One, the tears of Tiamat become the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. So that's, if you were in the ancient Near East, if you were in the Babylonian Empire, you would have been familiar with these two major rivers. This is your story of how they came to be. The tears of Tiamat as she was murdered by her child. Okay. So then Marduk takes her body and uses it to create the heavens and the earth. So what are the heavens and the earth made out of? They're made out of the body of a dead goddess, the mother of Marduk. All right. Then he wants to figure out why Tiamat waged war against him. Turns out he figures it out. Oh, it's Kingu. He advised her to do this. So what Marduk does then is he kills Kingu and he takes his body and uses it to make the first humans. That's what he does. So what are humans made of? They're made out of the body of a murdered god. Okay, cool. So what are humans made for in the story? They're made for servanthood to the gods. They're made to be servants to the gods. All right. That's the highlights. That's the hits. You'll notice that there are some similarities with the Genesis story. The Genesis story also starts, at least the chapter 1 story, starts with water, undifferentiated water. There in the beginning, there is some scholarly debate about whether the water was there or whether the story is explicitly stating that God created the waters and then he started working with them. But either way, the first thing besides God was these swirling waters, and the Spirit was hovering over the face of the waters. And then God starts to create. There's another interesting similarity here, that in both stories, creative acts are divisive acts. They're acts of segregation, so to speak. The creative act of God or the gods in the Enuma Elish happens in every case by dividing things. So God divides land from water. He divides light from dark. And this is the ordering. So ordering of chaos happens by dividing things from each other, by separating them. He even divides the animals up, the kinds of animals are. And then in the culminating move, he actually divides male from female. So order in both stories, of course, in the Enuma Elish you just heard, you get order happening, creation happening by dividing things, whether it's the division of waters in the first act of creation, or whether it's the literal act of dividing up a God's body to be separate things. So that's a big similarity. That order comes from chaos, chaos associated with water and darkness, light or order associated with light and the earth, and separation. Right? Weirdly, chaos is associated with undifferentiation. Some undifferentiated mass, order associated with separating that mass out into different kinds of things, which makes sense. That's what we do when we order things. We separate them out into their kinds and we give those things names, right? Okay, so there are some similarities, but the differences are going to be more key, because it's the differences that show you how the Jewish writers are critiquing the Enuma Elish. Again, assuming what I've said we're going to assume. The most obvious is that the Genesis creation story is a monotheistic creation story. So one of the things that you imagine these Jewish writers, they're writing this story, they're responding to the Enuma Elish story, and they're saying, hey, listen, some of this y'all got right. This is a piece y'all got wrong. Okay? You think there's all these different gods. No, there's one God. Okay, so that's a really basic difference. However, really importantly, you can start to see one of the other big differences, kind of maybe just slightly less obvious, that just jumps off the page at you when you set these stories side by side, is the level of violence in the stories. The creation in Genesis 1, there's no violence. The creative act is a non-violent act. Think about it. How does God create in Genesis 1? He creates by speaking. He speaks things into existence. How do the gods create in the Enuma Elish? They create by murdering in almost every case, except for that first act of division of waters. Everything else was created by murder, right? And that is a really important point. Because if you think about the worldview, the sort of mentality that comes out of that, if your world and everything in it, including humans, was created by murder, you are literally made of the product of a murder. Your heavens, your earth are literally the bodies of murdered gods. Then the practical effect of that, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but the practical effect of that is violence is part of the nature of reality. Violence and murder are part of the nature of humanity, and therefore it's unsurprising and to be expected and to some extent forgiven, really, when humans act in violent, murderous ways. Not only is that what you're made of course you're going to act in the ways of like the things you're made out of, murder, but it's also the way the gods by nature were acting. So you're mirroring the behavior of the gods. You're acting in addition, in a way that is congruent with the stuff you're made out of, the product of murder. It's unsurprising. It's justifiable, even. So compare that to the Genesis 1 creation narrative. In Genesis 1, what does God say when he creates each time? In each case, you have the 7-day or 6-day creation cycle. In each case, with the exception of the 6th day, he says, and he saw that it was good. He said that it was good. The 6th day, he said that it was very good, because on the 6th day, he created humanity. So that's the culminating act of creation of humanity. That's putting the star on top of the tree. That's the really the coup de grace. So it's good. Now, if you jump forward and you know the story of Genesis, most people do, you know that it falls apart eventually. Evil comes into the world. But this little gap, it takes one page of the Bible for evil to come into the world, but that gap is really important. It's vitally important, really, because the gap means that violence was not part of the nature of creation. Murderousness, while it did come into the world really quickly, was not part of the intent and was not part of the very nature of creation. It went wrong, but that's not how it was created. The Enuma Elish, very much not so. Created right from the beginning from violence. We are the products. We are literally the products of murder, created from the body of a murdered God. Okay, so violence is there from the start in the Enuma Elish. Violence is part of the nature of the gods in the Enuma Elish, and violence is really part of the nature of humanity in the Enuma Elish. And none of those things is true in the creation narrative. And you can almost see through the page and see the Jewish writers saying that on purpose. To see this in its context is to see that the Jewish writers are repudiating a view on which the world and humanity is founded in violence. That its very nature is violence and wrongdoing and murder. And they're saying, no, the world is actually good. God created the world good, and God himself is good. God himself is one, and he is good by nature. Humanity had some part of its nature that was originally not evil. Or so it seems. He created humans. He saw that it was very good. Now, so that's where you really see the difference between these two views, and you can start to see that the writers of Genesis were trying to say something about the nature of the world, about the nature of God, and about the nature of humanity. And you see it more clearly when you see the target of their criticism.